What's going on, guys? Right, Teacher now, and we are here today with a tier list video. So I was watching my good friend Exostomp. He made a video recently on Pokemon types in Draft League format, and he made a tier list that has some interesting insight to it. I'll leave a link down to that in the description below, so go check him out and go check his thoughts out. But I'm going to weigh in and I'm going to give my take, because a lot of different players have a lot of different opinions on Draft League format. A lot of people prioritize different things. So in this, I'm going to look at typing specifically and stuff like that, and I'll probably go into more detail about more specifics within that typing, because even within Pokemon types, there's a lot of different ways you can use those. But just to give you guys an idea of the criteria, S tier is going to be mandatory. Every single draft team should have this type, ranging all the way down to D tier, which you would never draft as particular types specifically for the actual typing, but it doesn't necessarily mean that these types are particularly bad. In general, you just don't always draft them for the type. Now, of course, this is my opinion, so definitely let me know if you disagree with one of my typings in the comments. I would love to read them. But without further ado, let's start with the bug typing. So, Bug is a pretty bad type in general. Bug is not very good offensively or defensively. And while the Bug does have some decent use in draft, of course, we mostly look towards sticky webs, Pokemon like Ribombee, Pokemon like Orbeetle, even Galvantula, very, very solid bug types that offer sticky webs. There are some very decent top-tier bug types, of course, like Volcarona and Scizor, and even Scyther has actually got some decent usage right now. But they're not necessarily, perfect because of their bug typing. They're generally perfect for other reasons. Obviously, Pokemon do get Quiver Dance, of course. Bug types with Quiver Dance are pretty strong. Ribombee, Volcarona, even Gmax Butterfree are decent options, depending on what draft format you're playing. But yeah, Bug in general, you don't draft a Pokemon because you think, oh crap, I need a Bug type. That doesn't really happen. I mean, if you are drafting like that, then you're probably doing something wrong. But yeah, Bug as a typing, not really all that great. You don't draft a Bug for an individual type. You might draft it for other reasons, though. Dark type. Dark is kind of a tough one, because there are some very, very good Dark types, but there are some kind of very middling Dark types. Obviously, I think I'll put it in B, but it may well move up to A. But in terms of the actual typing itself, Dark is very mixed kind of value. Of course, being immune to Psychic is nice, and obviously in recent generations, thanks to the nerf to Prankster, it's actually immune to those kind of Prankster moves, which is nice for it. There are some very, very strong Dark types in the format. We're looking at things like Bishop, we're looking at things like Crawdon and Hydreigon. These are very, very popular Dark types in Draft League format. Mandibuzz is becoming a very compulsory mon, especially with access to heavy duty boots. Weavile, probably one of the better offensive Dark types. So there's a lot of good Dark types in the format, but I feel like Dark specifically is not the greatest type in the world. You definitely want to draft one if you can. Having Psychic immunity is always nice, because Psychic is a very good offensive typing, but you don't necessarily draft Dark for perfect reasons. But Dark is very strong. Stab Knockoff. Knockoff is incredible utility. It's one of the best moves in the game, in my opinion. So yeah, Dark is a very good typing. I would say it's not 100% nailed on. It could well be an A tier type. We'll have a look as we move further in to have a look. But let's move on to Dragon. Now, Dragon is an A tier type. It's not S tier. I do think you definitely need a Dragon on your team, because by virtue of the nature of its incredible actual distribution in terms of type effectiveness, it's got a lot of very, very nice resistances to have, and only having a couple of weaknesses in Ice and Fairy, and of course itself, is kind of a very potent thing. There's a lot of very, very strong dragons in the format. Hydreigon's been aforementioned, Dragapult has been exceptional. Even defensive Pokemon like Goodra, really, really strong dragon types that are definitely worth it. I've been liking Noivern quite a lot, picking that up as a faster offensive mon. But yeah, there's a lot of great dragons in Draft League format. You're never going to be short of a good one. Even Flapple isn't that bad, despite its quad weakness to ice and stuff like that. Appleton's very naturally bulky. There's a lot of good dragons in the format, and if you're not drafting a dragon, then you're kind of missing out on a lot of important resistances, which could really hamper your draft. I don't think you absolutely 100% need it, but I think if you can draft a solid team with a Grey Dragon, you definitely should do that. So, next up is Electric. A lot of people rag on Electric. They kind of think it's not the best typing in the world. I actually really like Electric, but more specifically fast Electric Pokemon. Pokemon like Jolteon, Pokemon like Galvantula, Pokemon like Raikou. These kind of Pokemon are very, very good in the format. The reason why is access to Volt Switch. Volt Switch and pivoting in Draft League format is very, very important. You need to be able to gain momentum on your opponent to put your opponent on the back foot. Moves like Volt Switch, U-Turn, Teleport, these kind of moves, Baton Pass, stuff like that, very, very common in Draft. Electric is a very, very good typing by virtue of the fact it only has one weakness, which is Ground, which is annoying. But in all honesty, like, you can build a team around that with absolutely no problem whatsoever. Obviously, Pokemon like Jolteon used to get access to Hidden Power Ice, but they don't anymore for obvious reasons. But then again, Jolteon in Rain does actually get Weather Ball now in this generation. So, Water-type power output from Weather Ball in Rain. Pretty solid, especially hitting 100% accurate Thunders as well on anything that's not Ground-type. So, Electric's a very, very solid typing in Draft League format. You definitely want to look for faster ones. Slow electric types don't really do that well. Magnezone can kind of be an exception, but that's a middling speed tier that sometimes runs Scarf. So, yeah, that's definitely a typing you should always look for. You definitely want to have one on your team. My particular favorite in terms of electric type is Rotom. Rotom is a very, very solid electric type. While it's not super fast, it's base 85 speed, I believe. You can often run its Scarf. It's got a lot of other typings because of its forms. It does get Volt, which is also an incredible defogger. So, Rotom is definitely one to pick. If a Rotom form is up and you need a Rotom form, and you need some decent defogging, as well as good pivoting, definitely pick up a Rotom. Alright, Fairy is S. Not just because it's my favorite typing, but it is actually the best typing in the game right now, in my opinion. There's a lot of fantastic fairies in the format that are very, very difficult to deal with. Ribombee being my personal favorite, of course. Pokemon like Azumarill, very strong. Gardevoir, very good offensively. But then even like defensive ones, there's things like Clefable, which is absolutely exceptional right now. In my opinion, it's the best fairy in the game by far. You know, and there's a lot of okay ones. Just looking at a tier list that I'm in recently, Grimmsnarl's got a lot of utility. Definitely worthwhile Pokemon to look at, considering picking up. You got things like Mimikyu, which is actually not that bad offensively. Primarina, of course, is incredible offensively. Pokemon like Sylveon has a lot of utility. Togekiss has quite a wide way of playing. But yeah, there's a lot of good fairies. Alola Ninetales, always an interesting one to pick. Hatterene, of course, great for Trick Room teams. There's a lot of nice fairies that are in the upper tiers that are definitely worth picking up. So I think fairy is an exceptional typing. And if you don't have a fairy on your team, you're probably doing something wrong. So, yeah, definitely pick up a fairy. And if you can, get a high tier fairy. There are some okay lower tier fairies. I'm personally not huge on lower tier fairies, but if you need like defogging, Klefki is never a bad option. Obviously Ribombee is in the lower tiers, but that's my favorite. Pokemon like Whimsicott often slip under the radar as a fairy type. You don't generally draft it because it's fairy, you draft it because of Prankster, but it is actually a very, very good fairy and often middle to lower tiers. I'm just going to have a look, see if I can find another fairy I really like in low tier. There's not super many, I often draft higher tier fairies. Let's see. Something like Galarian Weezing isn't a bad option. I do quite like Galarian Weezing. Definitely an interesting one. But yeah, there's a lot of good fairies out there that you can pick up. So if you can pick up a good fairy, please do. 100% worth your time. Really, really worth it. Alright, fighting. I'm never really sure where to put fighting. It's not D tier, it's better than Bug. But fighting is an interesting type, and it kind of got nerfed since Generation 6 with the fairy type. It hasn't really found the light of day since. Obviously, there are some pretty good fighting types, like Terrakion, Conkeldurr. These kind of fighting types that can actually really take on even its checks. But in terms of how good fighting really is, Like, I wouldn't inherently prioritize drafting a fighting type, but having one is always nice, especially for dark types and stuff like that, because fighting does have the nice dark resistance, which can help. Obviously, Pokemon like Keldeo also have things like Justified, things like Terrakion gets it as well. Fighting actually can be very, very annoying, but it's not a huge priority. I don't tend to prioritize drafting a fighting type, certainly not early. But it's definitely one. There's a lot of great low-tier fighting types, especially with the new tutor moves in DLC 1. Pokemon like Hitmontop getting Triple Axle, things like Sock actually surprisingly good. We've seen Exo use it in the GPL to very, very good effect. One of my personal favorite fighting types is Pangoro. I've talked about it being pretty underrated in the past. Sadly, its speed tier kind of lets it down, but it does hit incredibly hard. Really, really solid fighting type in general. In terms of like upper tiers, there's not that many good fighting types. I mean, there is Holucha, of course, probably one of the most well-known ones alongside Terrakion. But yeah, there's not a huge amount of good fighting in upper tiers for me. I'm not huge on upper tier fighting types, but definitely some lower tier ones. Hitmontop's always nice. Gallade can be interesting if you can use it properly. But yeah, even things like Girder, getting access to Defog this gen, Hitmonchan with Rapid Spin Bullet Punch can be a good way to outrun like Rabombi leads, for example. But yeah, Persimmon is a interesting one. That's a pick I've certainly used a bit recently. Just want to look. Toxicroak is very nice in Rain, for people that are running Rain teams. Scrafty's always nice. Lower tier pick, obviously quad weak to Fairy, which kind of sucks, but actually has some decent options. But yeah, you're not looking in at specifically fighting type because it's like, oh crap, I haven't got a fighting type. But it's a nice little type to have if you have room to fit it in your draft. It's definitely worth picking. Alright, fire type, definitely an A tier pick. Fire, more specifically physical fire, in my opinion, is very, very strong in draft. Pokemon like Darmanitan are exceptional. Obviously, there are special fires that are good as well, Volcarona being one of my personal favorites. But yeah, I feel like physical fire is very, very solid. Pokemon like Arcanine, Pokemon like Incineroar, even Alola Marowak, which is something Combat and I have been using in the EDL, has been a lot of fun to use. Definitely been a good pleasure to use that. Just looking to see if there are any other fires that I would definitely draft. I mean, Chandelore's seen a bit of a rise in usage. That's partly helped by its ghost typing getting a little bit better, but it's an interesting special fire. Rapidash is a sneaky low tier one, actually, just a slightly worse Arcanine. But yeah, a nice pickup nonetheless. Let's see. Talonflame got nerfed, but kind of got semi-buffed with heavy duty boots. There's Ninetales, of course, if you want a Sun team. Torkoal, of course, being the better Sunsetter, but it is still always worth picking up. Let's see, what else is nice. Cinderace, of course. Definitely very, very scary, especially now it's got access to Libero. But yeah, looking at physical fires primarily. That's kind of what you want to go for. You could go for Rhythm Heat if you need a defogger, of course, with heavy duty boots. But yeah, I really like my physical fires. I prefer them to special fires, but if I do have to draft special fire, you can draft other things that are physical instead. I think it's no problem with that. But my personal preference is physical fires. Next up is flying. You definitely need one on your team. Flying, of course, the most common defog. Pretty much every flying type has defog. There's only a couple, I think, that don't have it. But they don't really fly per se, like Gyarados, for example. But yeah, flying is a very, very important type. Actually got massively buffed in this generation with heavy duty boots, which means that you can actually switch it in on Stealth Rocks and not lose any health. Because typically you normally lose 25% otherwise, sometimes 50% if you're looking at Talonflame or Moltres, for example. But yeah, flying, very important. Decently fast typing in general. Pretty specially offensive for the most part, but actually a very, very important type for defogging. There are good physical flyers like Braviary and stuff like that. But yeah, I really do think flying is necessary. Defog is an essential part of any draft. Hazard removal is just as important as hazards. If you don't have good hazard removal, you're kind of in a bit of a bad spot. You definitely want to prioritize it if you can. Getting a good flyer, especially a good defogger, is always nice to have. Preferably multiple if you can, but you don't necessarily have to draft multiple flying types for defog. There are some pretty semi-decent defoggers that are not flying type, things like Whimsicott, things like Klefki, of course, things like Conkeldurr actually gets it now, but you never really run it on that. Things like Skuntank isn't a bad defogger in the world, so yeah. But you definitely want a flying type that has defog. Mandibuzz is probably the best one right now in terms of that, because it's very bulky naturally, with access to heavy duty boots and roost and stuff like that. Got a lot of utility. Definitely would consider picking up Mandibuzz if it's open. Generally that's a pretty contested pick for defogging. But yeah, grab yourself a flying type. Now, Ghost type is a type that's been on the rise. Definitely a very, very solid typing. I don't think it's as important as Dragonfire or Flying, so I'll put it in B tier though. So, Ghost is a very good type, largely due to being able to block Rapid Spin. Being able to spin block and prevent your opponent from removing hazards is actually very, very annoying. Ghost is does have some very strong types in Draft League format, Dragapult being probably the main one. Aegislash is also up there. Pokemon like Gengar. Poltergeist has actually been somewhat decent, but even down in the lower tiers, picks like Dusclops, picks like Dhelmise, like these are really, really good ghosts to have. I mentioned Chandelure before as well, but yeah, Ghost is very nice. I actually really like Doublade quite a lot. Doublade is a pick that often goes under the radar, but I actually think Doublade is a very good offensive ghost. Is in part helped by its steel typing, but Ghost is a good type. Poltergeist as a move is actually very, very strong. On a Alolan Marowak, it's exceptionally strong. But yeah, Ghost is definitely seen on a big rise thanks to the lack of Pursuit trapping. Pursuit got taken out of the game. Does still have to be mindful of Sucker Punch, but having a good spin blocker can be really annoying for your opponent if they lack defoggers. And if they're relying on Rapid Spin on things like Excadrill and stuff like that, Ghost is a nice type to actually have access to. Personal preference of mine, probably something like Dhelmise. I think Dhelmise is very, very nice to have in low tier. But if you can afford things like the Aegislash or the Dragapult and you can play around them, definitely pick one of those up. Alright, Grass type. So Grass is an interesting one, right? Because in specific situations like Sun teams, mons like Venusaur are definitely worth having. There are some very nice grass types out there, of course. Rillaboom probably being the premier grass right now. Amoonguss is also a very solid grass. Whimsicott I've mentioned before. Very, very nice grass type to have. Rotom-Mow, good defogger. The question is, though, like, do you really necessarily need a draft a grass type? So this is one of the cores that has kind of sort of dropped in priority. Firewater Grass used to be incredibly strong in previous gens, but I feel like you could probably get away without drafting a grass. I personally put a little bit of priority on having grass type because I still like having completed cores, because they do give you a lot of good coverage options. They do give you a lot of resistances as well. But yeah, generally, if you're not really drafting Rillaboom as a grass type, you're probably looking at specific grass types to help your team. Whimsicott, of course, gives you utility. Venusaur is good in Sun, and other Chlorophyll mons are the same. But there's not a huge amount of grass-type presence in the upper-tier format. Roserade is an interesting one. Definitely one that goes under the radar. Serena's a good rapid spinner. Dhelmise, of course, is grass as well. Just seeing if there's any other grasses that I would absolutely draft. I mean, Celebi. Celebi is a pick I've drafted before. I've not had too much success with Celebi, but I do like it as a pick. But I wouldn't necessarily inherently go for it. There's picks like Tangrowth, which is an exceptional bulky grass type, especially if you're running Assault Vest and stuff like that. But yeah, you're generally drafting grass for specific reasons, and most of the time it's probably going to be something like a Rillaboom. Ferrothorn is a nice grass type as well. Pretty decent bulk. Gets access to rocks and spikes. But yeah, if you're picking a grass type, you probably want a more bulkier grass type, unless you're going for Sun, in which case you probably want Venusaur. But yeah, I really like grass as a type. I think it's a type that you can probably get away with not necessarily having. but it's a pick that I personally put a bit of priority on, so I think it's definitely worth having. Ground type for me is a must. Ground, of course, as we talked about with electric, is the only thing that electric doesn't really appreciate. But it's also a very important typing because it prevents pivoting, Volt Switch especially. Also, U-turn does very little to it. There's a lot of great ground types in the format, especially looking at Excadrill. I personally have had a lot of success with Sandaconda in the past. Crocodile coming back into the metagame thanks to the DLC. Really, really good ground type. Then we're looking at things like Mudsdale, of course, being my personal favorite ground type. Mudsdale's exceptional right now. Seismitoad is a very strong ground type, only has one weakness, yes, which is grass. Gastro, personal pick that I know one member of my community hates. But yeah, there's a lot of nice ground types. Runarigus is a really good bulky ground. I think if you go on the more bulkier side of ground, you could definitely do well. But even semi-offensive mons like Rhyperior, actually very, very decent ground type. Better in doubles format, so if there's doubles draft, definitely pick up Rhyperior. But yeah, I really like ground. Very decent defensive typing. Most of them get rocks as well, which is always nice. Excadrill is a huge bonus because it gets rocks and rapid spin, which is definitely nice. Also has the steel typing, which helps it out. I definitely think you should absolutely draft a ground type. If you haven't drafted a ground type, you need to find a way to cover for Volt switching. Usually Pokemon with Volt Absorb can definitely do that. Things like Zeraora. But you could definitely run into trouble without a ground type. I think you definitely need one. So draft one. Especially decent ones. Even Mamoswine is very solid. And also mons if trapping is allowed. Pokemon like Dugtrio is generally solid. So definitely consider that. Ice is a pretty trash typing. In general, Ice does not have any immunities or resistances, so that's something to bear in mind. But alongside that, generally you're not really drafting Ice types in most formats, unless you're drafting things like Mamoswine, things like Alolan Ninetales. There are some situations where it's pretty nice, things like Aurora Veil, pretty nice, especially if you're running like Gmax Lapras and Gmax format, but you really don't draft ice types because you need an ice type. Freeze dry is a thing, but again, like that's mostly Gmax Lapras that really abuses that, along with Alolan Ninetales. But yeah, in general, you don't really draft ice. You don't really need ice as a typing. Ice is a pretty lackluster typing in general. And if you're kind of needing like things that ice are good against, like flying and stuff like that, you're probably going to draft an electric type or something like that instead. You're not really going to draft an ice type specifically for an ice type. Normal, I'm not a huge fan of normal type in general. It does have some merit to it, but again, I wouldn't specifically draft a normal type because I need a normal type. But normal has an immunity to ghosts, which can be interesting. It can definitely cause a few issues. There are some pretty nice normals out there in the game, things like Diggersby, definitely a mod I've used a lot recently. Ones like Indeedee are actually a pretty solid Trick Room option. And there's always the old classic Chansey and Blissey that everybody loves to hate as a normal type. But yeah, there are some okay normals in the game, but generally I wouldn't not necessarily prioritize normal as a typing. I don't think it's a terrible type by any means, but I'm not going to prioritize normal all that much. If I get to pick up a normal type, if I've got room for it, great. But if not, I'm not really that concerned about not having a normal. I do try to draft one though if we can, because they generally have decent move balls, but you're probably going to need them for specific reasons, and the specific reason probably isn't normal type. So yeah, I'm not going to prioritize normal. Poison is definitely one that's worth having, but more specifically a grounded poison type, and the reason why that's important is because of toxic spikes. Now, grounded poisons actually can remove toxic spikes for free as soon as you switch it in, so that has a lot going for it. Poison as a typing in general, not a super great typing, but the utility that it provides, a lot of poison types have access to toxic/toxic spikes, toxic being 100% accurate, toxic spikes actually being a very prevalent hazard in Draft League format. But in general, like poison-wise, you're probably looking at things like Amoonguss, a very solid grounded poison. Galarian Weezing if you're not running Levitate. Very decent grounded poison. Scolipede is okay. I've been seeing a bit of success with Scolipede on ladder recently. Definitely a nice little grounded poison to pick up. Things like Venusaur's not bad. Obviously, you've got access to things like Toxapex. Very solid grounded poison, of course. Very bulky naturally. Can definitely be a very solid pickup. I'm just thinking, is there any other grounded poison that I've drafted recently? I mean, I guess Toxtricity, but I don't really value Toxtricity all that highly. I value it more as an electric type. Skuntank is always nice. Things like Drapion can be interesting, although not the best offensively. But yeah, it's largely going to be things like the Amoonguss, which are really nice bulky poisons that are actually pretty worth having. Scolipede's nice because it actually can set up toxic spikes of its own, which is nice. Gengar is a good offensive poison, but it's better for its ghost typing. But yeah, having access to grounded poison, definitely pick one up if you can, because it can dissuade people who have access to toxic spikes in their team for running it, because it's going to be pretty obvious. So I would definitely pick up a poison type. I wouldn't early prioritize one. There are definitely more important types to prioritize in this list, but definitely if you can pick up a grounded poison, do it. Alright, Psychic opens up a lot of doors, but I wouldn't, again, much like some of these other types, I wouldn't inherently prioritize it. But Psychic is a phenomenal offensive typing. In my opinion, it's probably one of the best offensive typings in the game. It hits a lot of things. A lot of good Psychic types have a very, very wide move pool. Gothitelle is exceptionally annoying if trapping is allowed, because it gets Calm Mind and access to stuff like that. Cosmic Power is a problem. But aside from that, things like Gardevoir I've had a lot of success with as a Psychic type. Starmie is a pretty good offensive Psychic type. There's also a Spinner, which is always nice to have access to. Obviously, you've got Pokemon like Mew, Necrozma, very good, versatile offensive Psychics. Celebi, of course, is a good Psychic. Things like Hatterene is a decent Psychic. Indeedee's a good Trick Room setter if you've got access to it. Things like Slowking, good bulky Psychic. Same as Slowbro, of course. There's a lot of wide ways you can play Psychic type. Reuniclus is probably one of the more versatile Psychics, given the fact it can be bulky or pure offensive. But yeah, Psychic, very good offensive typing. Not entirely compulsory, but I think definitely worth picking up. If you get access to a good Psychic, pick it up. Definitely don't let it go, because you might want to prioritize a good Psychic. Certainly in the mid-draft, once you got your main Pokemon. Rock types are pretty bad typing. You don't generally draft Rock type specifically for Rock type, although there are some good Rock types like Terrakion. Definitely a pretty potent Rock type, but that's more of a unique one more than anything else. Generally, Rock type as a type is paired with other typings that actually make them good. You know, things like Tarantrum's a great Rock type, but it's a Rock Dragon, which helps it out a lot. You know, Terrakion being a Rock fighting, of course. But yeah, in terms of the actual type itself, Rock's not that big a deal. Yes, obviously Rock gets Stealth Rocks, but so does most ground types. And I always prioritize ground. I don't prioritize Rock. I'm just actually looking to see if there's like an upper tier Rock type that I would always consider drafting. I guess Dust Lycanroc. But again, that's more of a unique scenario where that's a really good offensive like setup sweeper. But you don't necessarily think, oh crap, I need a Rock type. You know, if Lycanroc is up there and you can fit it on your team, definitely do so. But it's not really a good typing, in my opinion. It's got a lot of weaknesses that you don't really like, and you're going to have to play a lot around setting up for it. I mean, things like Rhyperior is a good Rock type, but again, it's better because it's ground. So that's the reason. Steel, probably the second best typing behind Fairy. Huge amount of resistances. Not that many weaknesses, and this is also one of the reasons why I like physically bulky Steels especially, because Steel's weaknesses, Fire, Fighting, and Ground, are very, very good physical offensive types. So having a good physically bulky Steel, things like the Steelix, things like the Corviknight, Skarmory, these kind of physical bulky Steels are really, really strong in draft. Because a lot of teams won't have naturally good answers. Yes, you might have the odd special Fire type, you might have the odd special Fighting type, You know, there are very few special grounds in the game. It's mostly the Nidos, but I don't actually remember if we have the Nidos right now. I don't think so. But yeah, there's not that many good specials of either of them necessarily. So a good physically bulky steel is an absolute staple in draft. Things like Excadrill, decent bulk, can be good offensively. Corviknight, Aegislash, not really bulky per se unless you're running shield form. Things like Ferrothorn, Alolan Dugtrio, very, very good quality steals. Sizzle's a better offensive one, but can be good defensively as well, as it does get access to Defog. Lucario's a offensive steal. Don't generally see it often though. It's often skipped. Durant is a decent middle tier steal if you want to run offensive. You've got Klefki for utility. But yeah, there's a lot of nice steals. And then if you look down in lower tier, for offensive steals, you've got things like Copper Rajah, got decent physical bulk. Things like a Scavalier, very bulky steal, very slow but exceptional in Trick Room. So there's a lot of nice steals out there, and a lot of different tiers as well. You don't necessarily have to draft an upper tier, like Steelix is often mid to low tier, really physically bulky mon. If you're running Mega format, Mega Aggron is a must. It gets access to Body Press in this gen, so that's going to be terrifying if that ever gets it back into the game. I hope not, but yeah. Physically bulky steel, definitely draft one. Absolutely important in the draft league. And last but by no means least, we're going to look at water. Water is definitely an S tier. Water is often considered one of the best. Obviously in rain it's exceptional. But even in sun teams, water types can be very, very useful to have. Especially out of sun, but in sun it's not super great. But mons like Primarina, Starmie, Azumarill of course. There's a lot of nice waters, especially in the top tier. Gyarados in Dynamax format is very strong thanks to Max Airstream. Kingdra's exceptional in rain. I've been having a lot of fun using Keldeo with Cambat and the EDL. Rotom Wash, and definitely a water type I draft often. Things like Cloyster. There's so many waters that I can think of that are really, really strong. Blastoise got nice buffs in this gen. Yeah, there's a lot of great waters, and with things like Tapu Fini coming back in DLC 2, there's going to be so much competition for water types, it's actually going to be terrifying. But yeah, you can't really survive a draft without water types. I've seen many drafts struggle without certain types. But yeah, this is basically my tier list. Looking at it, I don't think there's anything I would move down. I'm just thinking, would I move anything up particularly? Potentially normal moving up might be a thing, but I'm kind of back and forth on this. I don't necessarily prioritize it. I guess it's kind of similar to fighting in a way where if there's a decent normal left up and I can fit it on my team, I would probably draft it, but I wouldn't inherently draft it because it's normal. But I do think normal is a better typing than these three in the bottom. But either way, guys, that's going to be my tier list for my types that I prioritize in draft. Let me know what you think about it down in the comments below. I'm definitely looking forward to that. But either way, guys, thank you so much for watching. My name is Raimon, my teacher. Stay safe. Stay awesome. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Take care.